The book of Exodus. It's the second book of the Bible, and it picks up the storyline from the previous book, Genesis, which ended with Abraham's grandson, Jacob, leading his large family of 70 people down to Egypt. Now, Jacob's 11th son, Joseph, had been elevated to second in command over Egypt, and he had saved his whole family in a famine. And so Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, offered the family to come live there as a safe haven. And so eventually Jacob dies there in Egypt, and Joseph and all his brothers do too. About 400 years pass, and the story of the Exodus begins. The story of the Exodus begins.
Well, good morning, everyone. Great to be together this Sunday. I know the Lord has great stuff for us. If you're new here, I'm Chris Kainu. It's a privilege to pastor here. If you're online, welcome. Thanks for joining us digitally. We're looking forward to seeing you in person when we get the chance. We're continuing on in a series. It's a study in the book of Exodus. And as we step into this, I want to ask you, who is it that is a blessing to you? Like, who is it that just desires in their heart of hearts to bless you? I heard this cool story, a guy named Jeffrey Holt. He's this unassuming caretaker of a mobile home park in a small town, Hinson, New Hampshire. There's less than 5,000 people in this town. And some years prior, he had decided not to drive anymore. So he would drive his lawnmower down to the convenience store. And he was very friendly, kind of quiet. And people figured, he's just getting by. He's living in this mobile park. And his job was mowing the lawn there, and his clothes were kind of threadbare. And again, he was quiet, and sometimes he'd get something at the convenience store and just watch cars go by, read the newspaper, and pretty much was quiet, had a couple buddies. But the residents, they just thought he was kind of a quiet guy hanging out. He'd do some odd jobs. He rarely left town, and he rode his bike as well. Did not have a TV, didn't have a computer, and his furniture in his house was, it was in rough shape. And one of his buddies said this about him. He said, he seemed to have what he wanted, but he didn't want much. The reason that Jeffrey Holt came to national attention just at the end of last year was that when he passed away, he left his will. And it said this, very brief instructions. $3.8 million to the town of Hinsdale to benefit the community in the areas of education, health, recreation, and culture. And this is the guy. Okay? $3.8 million. He was very bright. Both his parents were professors. He himself had gone into the military and completed his education. And he had decided back in the day to do some investment that nobody really knew anything about. Now, here was an individual who simply wanted to bless people. He wasn't even looking for a thank you, much less fame, notoriety. Who is it? If I asked you, who in your world just does a great job of being a blessing to you? Like, they take joy in that. This study, of the book of Exodus, is a study of the Bible. And if you're new to the Bible, recognize that the Bible is about the God of blessing, the one who blesses. That's in his heart. It just lives in him. It's his desire. Sometimes people think of God as being uptight and really on edge. He's not. He's very relaxed. And he loves a great party. And he loves to bless people. God poured his blessing out on Adam and Eve, spring. How many people happy that we got some spring bloom happening here? Okay? Yeah, there's some cheers. That's awesome. Some of you are like, boo, allergies, okay? The rest of us will gently say, please just deal with it. We were walking in the yard, and my wife's like, oh my gosh, and we just saw these flowers that literally the day before had not bloomed, and they bloomed, and they were purple, I think. I'm colorblind. And they were gorgeous. What's your favorite spring scene? I don't know if you've ever got up to Hood River, where the orchards are in bloom, and it's just, people come from around the world to see that beautiful, beautiful garden. God made the most amazing, like whatever your favorite scene is, magnify that thousands of times over, you got Garden of Eden. And why did he make it? It was a birthday present for Adam and Eve. Voila. I don't know who you love giving gifts to. God loves giving gifts to people. He loves giving gifts to you and me. It's in his heart. He wants to bless. He blessed Adam and Eve. And Adam and Eve, they're cruising along, and they're walking with God in the garden. They make a decision. It's a crucial error. They believe the word of the enemy, that God's not really looking out for them, and they go independent. And so they lose the garden experience. They head out into the world. Now, the world's still filled with beauty and blessing, but of course, brokenness as well, right? Came into the scene. Darkness, closed in, and difficulty. God's desire to bless Adam and Eve and their children, it never dies. So he picks out this guy named Abram. We talked about this last week. Later we know him as Abraham, but he makes this promise in Genesis 12:1. And this is very important to the storyline of Exodus. It says, the Lord said to Abram, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to a land I'll show you. I'll make you into a great nation, and I'll bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. In the next verse, he says this, I'll bless those who bless you. In fact, read this with me. Let's start off. Here we go. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. That was the reintroduction, this dream that God has of the garden that's going to come in the end of time when all evil gets taken away and restored. And in the meantime, this is the redemption process. Exodus is a series about discovering the God of redemption. And this God brings blessing. And he made this promise to Abraham, who was in the area of Iraq. And then he would travel eventually over to the area that we now call Israel. He had sons. He passed the promise down from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob, who's also known as Israel. His name was changed to Israel. And he had 12 sons. His 11th son was Joseph. And some of you recall, Joseph ends up down in Egypt. And it's one of the coolest stories in the Bible. But the short version is this, that Joseph got sold into slavery, but he rises up to assist the Pharaoh, the king, and saves the nation of Egypt from famine. And the book ends that Joseph had blessed Pharaoh. Pharaoh responded well, blessed Joseph, and Joseph's whole family, including his father Jacob, who's also called Israel, moved down, and the 70 of them are living in this beautiful and lush land. And we pick it up at this moment where that generation passed away, but it's not a sad picture. They just old and happy and peaceful, and their kids are growing up in this beautiful, lush land. It's verse 8. Some of you recall where the thunderclouds roll in. And it says this, verse 8, it says, then a new king to whom Joseph meant nothing came to power in Egypt. This is the introduction of an evil character. He's actually, this new Pharaoh is a template of human evil. And he's the most corrupt figure in the Bible up to this point, in the narrative of it. And I don't know who you think of the most iconic villain out there. Think of, okay? That's Pharaoh. He's Darth Vader. Like, he rules the empire. And he's a bad dude. And he doesn't want good things for people. He wants destructive things. The Bible's painting a picture of human evil and how to recognize it when we see it. I grew up in an area where we were taught that evil is not an existent thing, and if you just think positive, good things will happen. Is that true? No. Evil exists, and you better recognize it. One of the gifts of the Bible is not only the beauty of who God is, but it illustrates the darkness of what evil is. And sometimes we can't tell those apart very well. It's why we study the Bible. It's important to recognize evil, because if you don't, you can bet it's going to recognize you. Some of you know exactly what I'm talking about, because you thought if you just thought the best and you trusted somebody, and they tore you up. If somebody asks you, how do you know if a person is evil, I wonder what you would tell them, what qualities you would point out. And that's what we find in this passage. A defining quality of evil is this. It's human evil is anti-human. Isn't that ironic? Human evil is anti-human. Verse 9, the evil Pharaoh, he says, look, he said to his people, to all the Egyptians, the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. He is against population. I just have to fast forward that this is a common theme throughout all of history. The 1960s, a guy named Paul Ehrlich said, hey, if you put food in a petri dish and you put mold in there, the mold will eat it up until it's all gone, and then the mold will implode on itself. And that's what's going to happen. Too many people are going to populate the planet, destroy all the resources that exist, and the human collapse is going to take place. And so from that day forward, people have been saying things like, we have too many people in the world. One difficulty in that is that he was wrong. Under such theories, China had a one-child rule for a long period of time. They are now in a panic because they don't have enough population. We must recognize the subtle disregard for human life when you hear the comment, there are too many people in the world. That is to speak in an anti-human fashion. It's like saying to your neighbors, hey, I wish you never had children. God loves every single human life. He's actually the ultimate father of every infant on the planet. His dream is to have a massive population. That's why he blessed Adam and Eve, and he said, be fruitful and multiplied. It used to be back in the day when a young couple got married, you were excited for them to have that experience of marriage, and you were naturally excited for them to have what? Yeah. I don't even know what you said, but it was kids. It was like, it's like, I hope they said children. And I get it, there's exceptions, but the attitude towards no big deal, God does not wish a smaller population on the earth. He's pro-human, he's not anti-human. And let's follow this for a minute. Signs of human evil, there's a few of them. We'll look at them, 3 of them here, we'll break it down. The othering of people, the devaluing of people, and the exploiting of people. We'll start with the othering of people. I'll explain this. When he says, at verse 9, he says, look, the Israelites have become, and it, in a sense, doesn't even matter how he finishes the sentence, because you know where he's going, is he's saying, you know what? Those people are not us. We are not like them. And when you other people, using that as a verb, if I'm going to other someone, then I'm going to make sure that you are something other than me. You are not like me, and we are far more different than we are similar, which is untrue. Every human on the planet has way more in common than they have differences. There's a scarcity mindset that goes with this. It's in this, and it moves not only from they are other than us, is a scarcity mindset says us or them. It's either us or them, because there's not enough blessing to go around. That's the othering of people, the devaluing of people. Verse 10 just rolls right along. It says, come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous. If war breaks out, they will join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. Well, if they're your enemies, why do you care if they leave the country? Well, because they're the backbone of the economic success of Egypt. They're very, very productive people. At this point, they're a free people, and they're very productive. Devaluing of people says, we are better than you are. We are more deserving than you are, and it's a blaming mindset, us above them. So it starts out with, well, it's either us or it's them, and by the way, it's us above them. And then that leads to exploiting of people. Verse 11. So they put slave masters over them and oppressed them with forced labor, and they built Pithom and Ramses as store cities for Pharaoh. You know, Joseph had built storage cities as a blessing to Egypt. There's every reason to believe that Israel would have participated in that as well. But when you start to see people as less than you, then you want to get something for nothing out of them. I want you, without giving to you, I want you to give all that you can to me. Some of you have had that experience. You encountered somebody that it sounded like they really cared about you. And when you started to do the math on the relationship, they were always withdrawing and depositing less and less. The mindset on this as well, if we look through these, the first one's scarcity, us or them, then it's blaming, us above them, and then finally the selfishness mindset is us using them. National powers have a very difficult time not functioning with that mindset. I wonder, as we walked through those, the othering of people, the devaluing of people, the exploiting of people, I wonder if you heard any of the campaign slogans of the 2024 election season. It's a huge year. I wonder if you recognize any of the tactics of Pharaoh as seen in our current political parties. You know, political parties, we got to thank God that we have these opportunities in our nation. But we also have to realize that all of us are so incredibly vulnerable to being corrupted. Political parties are the collection of all the people in them. Political parties can attract very dark and corrupt figures to lead them. And you can most easily identify that in the party that you're not. I can go down a list about the candidate that's coming up and how untrustworthy, narcissistic, self-serving, totally just conspired and put into these spots, looking out for themselves, doesn't care about the nation. I can just list all of that and not mention a name, and instantly people think of the other candidate that they're not voting for. Neither party is fully corrupt, but all parties are certainly corrupt. And our temptation is to try to keep this is the weird thing, guys, heading into this political year. Our temptation is to keep the other party accountable when the influence we have is in whatever party you're part of. And you should assume it needs to be held accountable as well. See, the new Pharaoh, man, he's a template of human evil. He's an expert at gaslighting. If you don't know what that is, it's basically the idea of turning the lights down, and then if somebody's like squinting to try to see in the dark, you just tell them they're going blind. It's like, no. The problem's not me. The problem is you. And this is what the enemy does. The enemy enters light and brings darkness. The enemy enters life and brings death. And then he blames it on you. If you think the stories of the Bible are simplistic, you may want to rethink that. Because they literally describe more deeply than anything else that's written. So we accept this. So many of us accept this as the Word of God. Even if you don't, recognize you can't find deeper, more significant accounts of human reality than the Bible. It's worth reading. Pharaoh, he's this dark figure, in extreme contrast with the Lord, and the Lord does the opposite. So Pharaoh enters light and makes dark. He enters life and he makes death. God does just the opposite. He enters darkness and he brings light. He enters death and he brings life. And you see that in verse 12. It says, but the more they were oppressed, the more what happened? Yeah, they multiplied and they spread. They grew. They actually prospered because God is continuing to bless them. Literally, God is bringing new life into the world with the Israelites with babies. They're having a bunch of babies. Like dozens of them and hundreds of them. And over the years, thousands of them. And they just keep growing. And the Jewish people, they had a value on human life that ran very deep. Historically, they were unafraid to bring children into a dangerous world. Right now, there's a story that's out there that's the world is so dangerous. How could you ever bring a kid into this life? Because God is the creator of life, and he will take care of everything. I'm not telling you to be unwise and foolish, but the truth is God celebrates every single human life that comes in to breathe. Every one that from conception forward, he celebrates. And the Lord is bringing light and life into the world. Some of you know Pastor Abby, Guy and Abby. They just had their daughter. This is their daughter. Yeah, that's worth oohing and awing. She's worth oohing and awing on. Toby Lou. Every single infant that comes into the world, every baby that's even in that creation, God is smiling with deep delight. There has never been a conception that has been a waste. There's never been an infant that has been unwanted or anything less than extremely valuable to God. The Lord brings light and life. The devil brings darkness and death. Are you catching on to the theme? Pharaoh is paralleled with the serpent in the garden. At verse 10, it says, he's saying this to the people of Egypt: we must deal shrewdly with them. Hebrew scholars, rabbis, they understood very much. This is pointing directly back to Genesis chapter 3 at verse 1. It says, now the serpent was more crafty, more shrewd than any of the wild animals the Lord had made. Israel is living in a garden, a beautiful garden land in Egypt next to the Nile, very prosperous, and comes slithering in is the new Pharaoh. He's bringing death and destruction. And there's no doubt that there is an evil human will involved in all of this, but there's also an evil supernatural spirit. And Pharaoh cannot claim the devil made me do it, but he could fairly claim that the devil sure helped me. You know, every ruler, every leader deals with insecurity. In this case, this guy is worried about his insecurity of his wealth and his power and who can he trust, and his own identity, I'm sure, is in his success. And insecurity will open you up to some dark forces that are more than happy to tell you what to do. So he starts out on a bad plan, and the plan is he's going to curse Israel. And that plan backfires. They don't diminish in their population, they grow in their population. And at that point, it's actually the grace of God that's poured upon Pharaoh that he should stop, and he'd be like, that didn't work. I should probably change plans. But does he? Not for a second. In his insecurity, he's got this choice to make. Hey, these are strangers to me. And I got a choice. Am I going to bless these strangers, or am I going to curse these strangers? And whichever one he does, it will reveal the God he is worshiping. If he blesses them, it will reveal that he is changed and he decided to worship the God of blessing. If he curses them, it shows that he's sticking with that dark force that curses. In the book of Exodus, it declares a statement and asks a question. The statement is that evil brings darkness and Jesus brings light. And the question is, which one will you serve? In other words, Exodus is asking, who are you going to serve? The good king or the evil king? And who could have dreamed that millennia before the great prophet Bob Dylan would anticipate his chorus that asks the same question, basically saying, it may be the devil or it may be the Lord, but you're going to have to serve someone. You got to serve somebody. And Jesus said, no servant is greater than their master. That means whoever you serve, you become like. One of our dreams is to empower one another as a church. One of our dreams is to empower one another to live a whole new life with Jesus and like Jesus more every day. Because most of us know what we're like when we're not with Jesus and not like Jesus. You see, the devil diminishes and the Lord illuminates. We live in a world filled with tyrants and predators and evil rulers. Hitler took out 10 million people. Stalin took out about 25 million people. Mao in China, at least 40 million. Guys, that's modern history. That's the greatest human slaughter of any century of all human history. Are we progressing as a race? Evil is alive and well. And man, we love to hate those tyrants. We love to hate Pharaoh. And they are clearly bad, bad men. But do not miss the point. And it's this: be a blessing to others, or you will curse yourself. The Lord understands that we need to be able to see ourselves in Pharaoh as well. And that we got to be a blessing to others or we will curse ourselves. Pharaoh, you know what's amazing? He actually subjects these people to slavery, right? But he himself, in the story, the slave master becomes the slave. He becomes the slave to his own desires, his own cravings, his drive for wealth and pleasure and power and honor. That's what Thomas Aquinas, he said that those are the four typical substitutes for God, and we could see easily within him. And in his insecurity, he could have chosen to bless Israel, which would have gone very, very well for him, but he did not. He chose instead to chase his wealth and pleasure and power and honor, because he would have to give up the control. He would have to surrender to the Creator God and turn over that control. And he's like, I will not do that. Therefore, he doubles down on his plan. He makes them slaves. If you follow the storyline, and we're going to do that, you realize he blows up his life. He blows up his government. He blows up his nation. He actually destroys his own family. His oldest son is the consequence of his sin. His oldest son's death is the consequence of his arrogance and his pride and the bitterness that he's let grow inside of him. Because when God confronted him and he had the chance to acknowledge, my goodness, I have to be wrong, and say, God, forgive me, I will change. He was a fool. And he stayed in partnership with a dark enemy. He doubles down. Verse 13, the Egyptians, they worked them ruthlessly. So he's got the people all now convinced as well. They made the Israelites' lives bitter with harsh labor in brick and mortar and with all kinds of work in the fields. And in all their harsh labor, the Egyptians worked them ruthlessly. Cultures do rise and fall based on the gods they worship. In this, there are 12 descriptive terms, phrases. Slave masters, oppressed them, forced labor, built cities for Pharaoh, more oppressed, worked ruthlessly, bitter lives, harsh labor, brick and mortar. That shows up twice in the Bible. Once here and once in Genesis chapter 11, where there's the building of the Tower of Babel, which is humanity saying, God, we don't need you. We're going to be completely independent. And here we find Egypt as a new Babylon with its stone buildings reaching to heaven, saying, God, we don't need you. They had worked in the fields, harsh labor, ruthlessly worked. It seems rather repetitive and redundant that such a short verse would have so much of that packed in there. But what God is illustrating through these writers is it's hell. These Israelites it's brutal. And that is flowing from the heart of this corrupt leader. And in his independence from God, Pharaoh came to hate God. It's the core plot conflict of Exodus that Pharaoh's hostility increases against God, specifically against God's promised children. And the principle is this: if you and I partner with darkness, our hearts become dark. And don't think you're immune to it. You know, I've watched a lot of lives blow up. And earlier on in my pastoral life, I thought, wow, bad choice, not going to do that, It was like, oh, wow, I guess you're pretty messed up, that kind of a thing. And man, as the years go by, I realize, except for the grace of God, there go I. I have the capacity in any one moment to make a decision to agree with darkness that could end up blowing up my life. I believe that. And it's not primarily because I'm afraid of the enemy. It's primarily because I know what happens to a human heart when it chooses to not trust God. And it's always destructive. Man, Joseph is such a massive contrast. Because he did the exact opposite. He was always dependent upon God, and he always blessed other people. He simply chose to be a blessing no matter what kind of hell was breaking loose in his life, and he went through a lot of it. Joseph was cursed by Egypt in terms of being purchased as a slave, and yet he never cursed them back. He blessed the governor, and he blessed the king, and he blessed the guards that were around him. He never cursed the governor's wife, who falsely accused him of rape and ended up with him in jail. He spoke truth against her lies, but he still ended up in jail, but never cursed her. He never cursed his brothers. His brothers betrayed him, sold him into slavery in the first place, but he never cursed them. He always blessed them. He had to confront them. At one point, he had to confront them with great harshness and intensity and absolutely humiliate them. But when he did it, he did not do it for revenge. He did it through tears. His heart was broken that he had to be that stern and that aggressive with those guys. And why did he do it? It wasn't to get even. It was because he wanted them to be blessed. And he was managing his own heartache in the middle of it. See, in relation to the people around us, we're constantly thinking about, am I blessed or am I cursed? Which is important. It's an important question. Some of you are repeatedly cursed, like darkness is repeatedly brought to you, and you keep taking it on. And you just need to know, God has not called you to be a doormat for someone else's cruelty and selfishness. There is this person that has your name, and you need to protect that person to the glory of God. So it's an important question. Most of us aren't necessarily having so much of the doormat experience and that difficulty, but we're just frustrated about, you know what, I'm just going to pick the people I like and hang out with them, and I'm calculating this very important question. That is, am I being blessed or am I being cursed by those who are around me? Important question, but not the most important question. The most important question is this: am I being a blessing or am I being a curse? Joseph, man, he wanted to be a blessing. He was not afraid to confront. He was not immune to anger. He just knew how to be angry without sinning. And Joseph chose to be a blessing. And check this out. Joseph left the cursing up to God. He didn't see that as his business. In all the injustice he experienced, Joseph understood something that the evil king did not. And that is, be a blessing to others or you will curse yourself. You might ask, like, okay, be a blessing. That's great. How do I do that? First of all, is do what Pharaoh did not, and that is run from darkness. Run from it. Make no agreements with it. Know a good guy, successful professional. He makes great money. He's a nice guy. I enjoy him a lot. He's not a church guy. But our paths cross with some frequency. Works all the time. I've come to find out through conversations that he respects the Bible but doesn't really read it. He thinks prayer is important and appreciates it but doesn't necessarily practice it all that much. He wants to help other people, and he does along the way, but he's pretty busy, so he can't do it as much as he wants. As we sat down and had a conversation, and he said, hey, I got to tell you about a problem that I have, and it's a drinking problem. I said, okay, tell me about it. And he said, he goes, I won't have withdrawals if I stop drinking. My body's not addicted in that way. That's not the problem. Here's the problem. I don't stop drinking. I know it's bad for me. I know I don't want to do it anymore. I know I could wreck my car and my life and someone else's life, but I don't stop drinking. talked about the end of a long day and that he's like, oh man, I just deserve a break. And when he heads to the bar and he knows he doesn't want to go there. And he said, that moment is not like an out-of-body experience for me. I know I'm right there. I know what I'm doing. I'm making these choices. But when I look back the next day, it's what I imagine an out-of-body experience feels like when you're watching your life. And it's not happening the way that you want it to happen. He's describing what it feels like to have a force seemingly overtake your will. Yet at the same time, he knows he's making the choice. Anybody been there? As life continues, I realize, hey, I gotta be a little healthier. And so on my good days, I have these good days where I say, okay, no added sugar today. Of course, cheat day, Sunday, love it. Whew. Worship the Lord, it's great. Wednesdays, I go out and I study at a place, and sometimes I'll put food out there. And one day, I was out there and I realized in the cupboard were Nutter Butters. Yeah, it's terrifying, right? I'm sitting there, I'm studying away, study the Bible, pray, study the Bible, trust God, don't eat sugar. And they're calling. Chris. So I ate 6 Nutter Butters. Now I'm not saying that the Nutter Butters are from the devil. I have hope that there'll be redeemed versions of them in eternity. But what I'm saying is sometimes there's a voice, and a lot of times we don't even need the devil. He just keeps you going, busy, and doing these habits that get these hungers down that, if I could get that, I would feel what? I feel better. And, maybe Nutter Butters are no big deal. Or maybe they're your addiction. Maybe food and eating is the escape. Or maybe it's the alcohol, or maybe it's anger, or sex outside of marriage, or pornography, or self-loathing, or oversleeping. And you're like, okay, is this just in my mind? Or is there a force like pushing me on this? To which the Bible would probably say, yeah. And you're like, okay, so what do I do? If I want to run from darkness, what do I do? One thing is ask for help. Learn to ask for help. I really respect this guy I was sitting with because I said, I've got a buddy he had a tough battle with alcohol, and he's very vigilant in his life right now because God gave him a second chance. And I said, would you be open to sitting with him and having coffee? And he said, yeah, which was like a miracle. Because the enemy wants to keep us isolated, right? God wants us to experience love and blessing and grace in another human. Some of you today, the enemy's got you in his sights. You are isolated. You need to raise your hand and say, help. You have too much to lose. Don't let your pride get in the way. God resists the proud but gives grace to the humble. Resist the devil and he will flee from you. But you have to humble yourself. And for some of you, today is the day you need to speak to somebody before you leave this place and say, here's the dark corner I'm in. And I don't know how to manage it. And you got to surrender to the Lord. You got to run from the dark, and you got to bring light if you want to be a blessing. I want to ask our musicians to come up. Ask yourself, am I being a blessing? Is that what I do? I appreciated Pastor Jeremy. He's walking us through some of our core values as a church that we've kind of nailed down. One of them is connecting, the time that we meet. It represents that value. And he found a question or created one or the other, and he said, I hope, he said, I want you to, everybody fill this in on the staff, fill in the blank. I hope I bring blank to people. I fear I bring blank to people. So we all want to be a blessing, right? So like one of them was, I hope I bring a listening ear to people, but I fear I bring a jabbering mouth to people. Mine was this: I hope to bring welcome and affirmation to people, but I fear that I bring busyness and half my attention to people. We all would say, I hope I bring kindness to people, but sometimes we bring indifference. We walk right past them. God wants us to be those who see people and the beauty in them, and He wants us to illuminate that beauty. That's what Joseph did. That's what Jesus does. Dr. Ludwig Gutmann, he's a Jewish German who escaped Nazi Germany in 1939. He found a job in a hospital at Britain working with paraplegics, people that couldn't walk. Mostly men injured in the war. When he first started working there, the hospital heavily sedated these guys and kept them in their beds basically till they died. Gutmann, however, he didn't see the patients the same way the other doctors did, and so he cut back on the sedatives. He forced these guys out of bed to move around if they all could. He would bring a ball in the room and he'd throw it at them, and they'd have to catch it, activating their brains, stimulating their nerves and their bodies. As a result, he was summoned to a tribunal of his peers that were alarmed at this behavior, where his methods were being challenged. And one doctor said, "These are dying cripples. Who do you think they are?" To which Dr. Gutmann responded, "They are the best of men." It was his generosity of spirit that changed how he defined them. He continued organizing games, and first at the hospital and then for paraplegics around the nation. In 1960, this led to the Paralympics, because a guy chose to bring light into darkness. It's what you're made to do, and you can do it. Jesus said, "Thief comes to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the fullest." And even in the face of death, we sense life from Jesus. At Easter, I shared a young mom. Her mother had been ailing and diminishing health for years and years, and then losing her ability to comprehend. And she's begging God, why don't you just let her come home? And it was last Sunday afternoon, a week ago, that the Lord brought her home. And though there's a sadness and the grief of the loss of her physical presence, there's a genuine joy. She's free. She's restored. This is the business of Jesus. It's what He's called you to. You cannot do it on your own. You need Him desperately. I need Him desperately. And then we have to practice bringing light instead of darkness. I want to ask our prayer team to come up. I want to ask you to reflect for a moment, just where you are. You can bow, you can kneel, you can stand off to the side. If you're partnering with darkness, speak that to God. To say, "Hey, Lord, this is a dark corner I go to, and I need freedom." If there's someone you need to bless, you're like, just ask the Lord, "Lord, who do you want me to bless?" He will speak to you.